Metal Gear Solid. A series that was at one point in time one of the largest game series of all time, but in recent years has kind of fallen out of the public eye, to put it lightly, with the last major entry in the series releasing all the way back in 2015. With the series being in a Phantom Pain style coma as of right now, I thought it would be interesting to examine one of the lesser known entries in the series, Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. Portable Ops was a Metal Gear game that released exclusively for the PSP in 2006. It differed from another PSP exclusive Metal Gear series, Metal Gear Acid, because it was intended to be fully canonical to the mainline series. And unlike Acid, it also attempted to bring a console-style Metal Gear experience to portable devices, as opposed to Acid's turn-based strategy approach. It did differ from the mainline series though, as it wasn't directed by series creator Hideo Kojima, who instead decided to take a backseat approach as a producer. Instead, directing duties passed on to Masahiro Yamamoto, and writing duties were passed on to novelist Gakuto Makumo. Sorry for butchering those names. Portable Ops also released around what was arguably the peak of the Metal Gear series. Snake Eater had come out 2 years previously and was widely beloved and wildly successful. Metal Gear Solid 4's reveal trailer E3 was met with widespread excitement, so why isn't it remembered? Sure, it has its fans, and it's sold well enough to warrant a multiplayer-focused standalone expansion, Portable Ops Plus, but in terms of the larger Metal Gear legacy, it's largely forgotten or dismissed by anyone other than die-hard fans. Portable Ops wasn't included in the HD collection or the Legacy collection, and after MGS4 it's barely been brought up in promotional materials or in other games. Now, why is that exactly? Well, that's what I plan on examining today. I was also hoping to shed some light on a game that I feel has been forgotten by time and deserves to have its story heard. Speaking of the story, great segue there, whilst trying to remain spoiler-free, it's easily Portable Ops' strongest point and does a lot with the limitations imposed upon it by its hardware.
The basic
starting premise is that Big Boss has separated from the Special Forces unit Fox ever since Operation Snake Eater, where he was forced to kill his mentor and mother figure in order to prevent nuclear war. We pick up with his story in 1970, 6 years after Operation Snake Eater, with him being held captive in Colombia, more specifically the San Jeronimo Peninsula. He is woken by his captor Lieutenant Cunningham, a member of the Fox unit. Cunningham believes that Big Boss knows about the location of the missing half of the Philosopher's Legacy, a slush fund worth $100 billion. Big Boss tells Cunningham he knows nothing about it, but still unconvinced, Cunningham continues to torture him, until eventually leaving to attend to another matter. A prisoner in the opposite cell to Big Boss aids him in escaping, with the prisoner revealing that his name is Roy Campbell, and that he is the sole surviving member of a Green Beret squadron that was sent in to investigate what's been going on in San Jeronimo. Campbell explains that the Green Berets were attacked by members of Fox working alongside Soviet troops, and that the leader of the rebels is a member of Fox codenamed Viper, although known more commonly as Gene. From then on out, the story follows Big Boss and Campbell as they investigate what's been going on, and build up their own militia along the way in order to take the fight to Fox. This is a pretty basic outline of the story, but should paint a picture as to what kind of story this is going to be. It's reminiscent of Snake Eater in a way, with the story being fairly linear on the surface. You know that Snake Eaters destroy the Shagohard and kill the boss, but having depth in its characters and the background politics and machinations. The story's a lot of great twists and turns and rug pulls to keep it fresh, and incorporates a lot of real-world history into its narrative, which is something I've always enjoyed about the Big Boss-focused Metal Gear games. In terms of characters, that's definitely one of the strongest aspects of Portable Ops' story, with Big Boss and Campbell making a fun pairing. Albeit not as fleshed out as like Miller and Big Boss or Solid Snake and Otacon, but still a lot of fun. A notable new addition in terms of characters is Alyssa, who's a young scientist working with Fox. She's performed by Tara Strong actually, who would go on to voice Paz in Peace Walker, and her performance is really great and makes the character super memorable and stand out. The villains though are probably the best new addition, with my personal favourite being Cunningham. Noah Nelson's performance of the character is just tons of fun to watch, and I honestly felt kind of bad in the boss fight against him because I didn't want to see him go. Python, performed by Dwight Schultz, is also a standout character, although he doesn't really get the screen time he deserves considering his interesting set of Mr. Freeze-esque abilities and his past history with Big Boss. Ursula is this psychic girl and the evil twin sister of Alyssa, and despite interesting revelations being found out about her by the end of the game, she isn't prominent enough for these revelations to really hit as hard as I think they should. She doesn't even get her own boss fight, unlike every other major villain in the game, so it kind of reinforces this idea that she's a little underutilized. Null, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of this. He gets 2 boss fights, as well as a decent amount of screen time, but comes across pretty one-note and underbaked, even with his history with Big Boss and being a fan-favorite character in the series, with him being better known as Grey Fox. The story really should have focused more on Big Boss and Null's past together, with Big Boss slowly tearing down Null's walls and emotional barriers, maybe leading to some sort of allegiance change, and him deciding to aid Big Boss in the final confrontation, but without spoiling anything specifically, this doesn't really happen, and the way it's wrapped up is a little jarring. Voice crack. Jean, the big bad of the story, is conceptually pretty interesting and has a lot of intentional echoes to Liquid Snake in a few ways. However, despite having the most screen time, and like I said, having a lot going on that's interesting conceptually, he lacks the intimidation and fun factor of Cunningham, or the unique look and personal connection with Big Boss that Python has, leaving him kind of feeling a little bit more unmemorable compared to the others. I'll say this, his design definitely plays into it a bit, because Metal Gear has a ton of pale, light-haired, pretty boys, and he just kind of falls in with the rest of them. So I think maybe giving him a gruffer design, maybe more reminiscent of Big Boss, maybe a beard or something, could have helped him stand out a bit more and be a little bit more memorable. Also, Gene as a name is kind of lame. No offense to anybody called Gene, of course, but when your codename is Viper, why would you not just use that all the time? Like, I get that Gene fits better into the theme of genetics and genes and, you know, all that stuff, but Viper just sounds cool. I know that's dumb and immature, but just call him Viper, it sounds cool. With all this being said, I imagine I've kind of come across more negative than I really feel. In reality though, like, most of the negative things I have to say have to do more with what could have been as opposed to what's actually in the game. A lot of the characters I've talked about are super memorable and fun and solid, but it's just I can imagine them being even better than they already were if the game didn't have the limitations it did and had a bigger budget. I've been harping on this idea of Portable Ops being limited for a while now, so what exactly does that mean? Well, Portable Ops is a PSP game that is trying to tell a story on the scale of other Metal Gear games, and unlike Peace Walker, lacks the extensive knowledge of what could and couldn't be done on a PSP at the time. Additionally, despite having Hideo Kojima's blessing as a producer, not having him be as involved as much probably gave executives at Konami the impression that this project wasn't as important. I mean, compare how different Portable Ops and Peace Walker are in terms of their budgets and content. It's clear at this time that Kojima's name carried a lot of weight around Konami, and not having his name so directly attached probably affected what the game could and couldn't do. With all that being said though, I think in terms of presentation it really pushes the limits of what was thought to be possible on a PSP. Like, as these super detailed, if tightly packed environments, impressive character models, and an S-tier soundtrack. No joke, Calling to the Night is my favourite Metal Gear Solid song ever. Even before I played Portable Ops, I heard it somewhere else, I think just like a video on YouTube, and I just loved it so much. It's such like a cinematic and powerful song, and it works so well, so I would highly recommend going and listening to that. No joke, I think it's the best. The cutscenes, rather than being in-engine, are all animated in a motion comic style, which you've no doubt noticed by now. It was done by Ashley Wood, the same guy who did Peace Walker, and it's mostly pretty strong and expressive, but there are times when poses and facial expressions are reused, so Peace Walker probably beats it out with just the sheer number of cutscenes and the quality of those cutscenes. The way the gameplay of Metal Gear, though, has been adapted is a little bit more of a mixed bag, although still positive overall. If you've played Snake Eater, you'll feel right at home here, with the moveset being replicated almost one-to-one. There's crawling, sneaking, stationary crouching, and the stamina meter has returned, although there are certain limitations and changes. Rather than catching wild animals and eating them like in Snake Eater, Portable Ops returns to the classic ration pickups that you saw in previous Metal Gear games. Stamina is still important though, and arguably even more so than any other game in the series, with it not filling up completely after starting a new mission, like not refilling automatically, and instead only being refillable through the ration pickups and resting. This plays into the new recruitment mechanic, which I'll talk more about later, but as a basic gist, different characters you play as have different levels of stamina, so for some, stamina is even bigger of a concern than something like health, because it's always deteriorating. Aiming down sights is back, unlike in Peace Walker I might add, but you know, regardless, we'll talk about more about that later, and is a little trickier than previous entries in the series. How anybody managed this without a second analog stick is beyond me, because even playing it on the Vita, which has dual analog sticks, I found it pretty difficult to aim precisely. Although for spray and pray type situations there is this lock-on system which works pretty well, so it isn't all bad. Levels are designed linearly, with the player being dropped into these levels roughly the size of a Snake Eater area, although slightly on the larger side. There are a fair few hidden nooks and crannies, but the limitations do get in the way of playing around with multiple approaches, but they're still fun and memorable enough to where I really enjoy playing through them, even with the limited scale. This limited scale also carries over to the equipment, with there being no camo or camo index inside. This change is kind of understandable considering that it hadn't become a mainstay of the series, and there's only so much that you can put on a PSP, but it still hurts personally just because I've always loved the camouflage in these games and the camo index. So that does hurt a little bit and gives Peace Walker the one-up. The disappointment is lessened though slightly, because I absolutely love the sneaking suit Big Boss gets in this game. It might be my favourite design of a sneaking suit ever. Comment yours, I think this one is pretty good, but that's just me. The tools you can carry with you is also pretty limited, with only 4 item slots. I can sort of understand the rationale behind this. Shorter levels means less need for extensive amounts of equipment and so on, but it's a decision that leads to a lot of dropping and picking up of items and inventory management. As part of the recruitment system though, you can get soldiers who have the delivery man perk, which allows you to send items automatically back to the truck. So if you pick up something and then want to send it back to pick up something else, you can do that. But it's something that doesn't come default with Big Boss, and a lot of the soldiers don't have that skill, so it's still pretty annoying. Speaking of this recruitment system, that's the major new thing introduced in Portable Ops, and something that is later expanded on in Peace Walker. Whilst in the field doing missions and so on, you can knock out enemy combatants and drag them back to your truck, which you arrive in at the beginning of the level. Eventually, after kidnapping them pretty much, they're convinced to join Big Boss's militia, and then you can assign them to one of 4 units: tech, medical, sneaking, and spying. The tech unit will randomly create equipment for you. With the higher the level of the tech department, the better the equipment produced. The medical unit will recover the health and stamina of staff that have gone out into the field, as well as produce healing items. The higher level your medical unit is will determine how well your staff recover, as well as the quality of consumables produced. The sneaking unit is what you'll use to deploy soldiers into the field, with the player being able to take up to 4 soldiers when entering a level. This system acts as an extra life of sorts, where if the player dies as Big Boss, they can swap to the body of another soldier, allowing them to continue the level. Different soldiers have different skills and different levels of health and stamina. Some soldiers even come with disguises that allows them to infiltrate certain areas. Lastly, you have the spying unit, which can be assigned to a specific area in order to gather intel. The player can then sleep and wake up to a report that will tell the player about what's in a given area, whether it be some new intel, a mission, or some items that can be collected. Despite Peace Walker taking obvious inspiration from this system, the two are quite different, with the way Portable Ops handles it being a lot more personal and hands-on. This is in part due to the fact that you have to manually drag enemy soldiers back to your truck, as opposed to just simply doing the quick fault and recovery system that is in Peace Walker and Phantom Pain. This more involved dragging of soldiers gives you the benefit of knowing them better. Like, I remember the names of my Portable Ops soldiers more than I do my Peace Walker soldiers, and it's not just because you end up recruiting way more in Peace Walker than you do here. That more involved process really does build more of a connection with them. Although I have pointed out some of the positives of this, I will say that it can be pretty tedious, especially when you don't have the Rescuer perk, which is a perk that allows you to drag enemies faster. But similarly to the Delivery Man perk, this is something that not everybody comes with, and Big Boss doesn't even come with it, so most of the time you're going to be dragging around these soldiers pretty slowly, and it can get quite tedious. So I'd say that Peace Walker overall probably beats out Portable Ops. Although I will acknowledge that Portable Ops does do a better job at actually incorporating the soldiers into the story and cutscenes. Like, you actually see soldiers come and help Big Boss. There are missions where you can play as the soldiers rescuing Big Boss when he's been captured. There's a lot more of that than Peace Walker, where in Peace Walker, Big Boss might as well just be a one-man army. I mean, when he's fighting Zeke at the end of the game, nobody in Mother Base comes to help him. He's just fighting Zeke all by himself. With all this stuff being said, I think it's about time that we talk about the elephant in the room: Peace Walker. Now, Peace Walker is something of a successor to Portable Ops, and many see it as kind of just a flat-out replacement of Portable Ops in certain ways. And in certain aspects, Peace Walker absolutely did do stuff that Portable Ops did, but just executed it better. The levels are much larger, camouflage is back, recruitment has been made much more intuitive, base construction is introduced. It's fully voice acted as opposed to Portable Ops' text-only codec calls. There's tons more equipment and weapons, there's larger inventory space, and overall it seems like Peace Walker pretty much overshadows Portable Ops in a lot of aspects. But personally, I don't think it's an entirely fair assessment. They both do have a lot in common, but I think they're different enough to where they can both stand on their own. One doesn't have to overshadow the other. The experiences of playing both are quite different despite both being on a PSP, and your mileage may vary on which one you actually prefer to play. Personally, Peace Walker still probably beats out Portable Ops slightly. I will acknowledge that this could be because of nostalgia, since Peace Walker was one of the first Metal Gear games I ever played back on the HD collection, but I think Peace Walker plays slightly better even with no first-person aiming or crawling. It's clear lessons were learned from Portable Ops, and the gameplay and level design evolved in a way I think mostly worked. I will say though, in terms of its story and characters, I'm a little bit more mixed on Peace Walker. Peace Walker is a more realised story with much bigger set pieces, cinematic emotional moments, and characters that actually get carried over into future games, but I also think it's a little bit too gung-ho. Like, the AI designs are pretty cool and interesting to fight, but this doesn't really fit into the tech of the Metal Gear world, and if you played the Metal Gear games chronologically like I did, it just gets really confusing because you keep asking questions like, why did they downgrade their tech? Like, Peace Walker was incredibly advanced and probably more than a manned Metal Gear. In contrast, Portable Ops does a better job at fitting itself into the narrative and tech of Metal Gear. Like, the way the tech evolves isn't way too advanced, and it does feel like stuff is evolving, but not too much. Portable Ops also has better antagonists. Even with my complaints earlier, Jean, Cunningham, Python, and Ursula are miles ahead of Hot Coleman and Zadornov. I do get that Peace Walker has replaced kind of the traditional Metal Gear boss fights where you'd be fighting a memorable villain with this cool gimmick, with fights against the Peace Walker AI. And I get what they were going for, and I do enjoy those fights, but I do think you miss out a bit on classic villain interactions and fun dialogue exchanges. So I do think in that aspect, Portable Ops also has the upper hand. I do also want to address a common critique of Portable Ops when it comes to talking about how canon the game is, and that is the relationship between Big Boss and Campbell, since it's never really mentioned in any games after it, both chronologically and in release order. That is a fair critique, but I would also say that if you have a problem with Campbell knowing Big Boss when he was younger, you should also have an issue with Otacon's father working with Big Boss and also looking identical to Otacon, but Otacon never mentioning this, like he never mentions the fact that his father knew Big Boss, or that they looked identical, or also the fact that Big Boss never mentioned Venom Snake, even in Metal Gear Solid 4, which was like the big moment where he reveals everything. He doesn't reveal that he had a body double this whole time, and that was the first person that Snake took down during the events of Metal Gear 1. He just doesn't bother to mention that pretty big piece of information. There are plenty of examples just all over Metal Gear in general, but personally I don't let it bother me. I can usually just do some headcanon gymnastics to come up with a reason why these things weren't mentioned, like maybe Campbell was told by the US government to not talk about his meeting with Big Boss because it would bring bad press, or it was classified. I enjoyed the dynamic enough to where it really didn't bother me, so personally I wouldn't let it bother me. With everything I've really wanted to talk about with Portable Ops out of the way, you know, obviously keeping spoilers to a minimum because I really don't want to go through the entire story because I really don't want it to be spoiled, because I do want people to play this game. What are my thoughts on Portable Ops overall? Well, it's a game that tried to do a lot with a little, and I think that's a massively commendable feat, especially considering the limitations of the time and the hardware. I can genuinely see a timeline where if this got Peace Walker money or was maybe treated as a mainline entry in the series, it would have reached the levels of Snake Eater. Like, I'm not even joking. I genuinely believe that the characters and this story have the potential to reach the levels of Snake Eater. But as is, it's still a damn good attempt at a Snake Eater sequel and a mainline entry in the series. And although I would have liked to have seen Sigint and Paramedic play a bigger role in introducing other characters and, you know, having this bigger spectacle and bigger budget, like I've said before, I still really enjoyed playing it, and even though it can be a little janky and you know, not perfect, I think this is really a game that's worth experiencing, especially if you're a Metal Gear fan. Like, let's be honest, we're starving for content right now, so why not give this a shot? You can get it on a PSP, obviously originally, you can get it on the Vita, it got ported there, or you could definitely not emulate it. I repeat, definitely don't emulate it. I am not advocating for the emulating of Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops. Just in case you've been holding off on playing it because Kojima wasn't as involved, I'd give it a shot. It really is Metal Gear through and through, and honestly I think Kojima would agree. Like, not only was he a producer on this, and gave it his full blessing, but it's clear that he tried to move on from the series for ages now, and I think he really wanted to usher it onto a new generation with Portable Ops, and then of course the original director of MGS4, but we obviously know now how that turned out, with the original director getting a bunch of hate and then Hideo Kojima essentially being forced back into the series and then being stuck with it until Phantom Pain, and then being able to make his weird shit with Death Stranding. I love Death Stranding, so I don't mind that, but it honestly wasn't too distant of a possibility that there was a time when Kojima might not have been so connected to the series, and I sort of think about if Portable Ops had been this massive hit that was given all this time and attention and was a big praise, would we have gotten the original idea for Metal Gear Solid 4? And how would the series be looking now? Would it have just inevitably fizzled out, or would we be on like Metal Gear 10 by now? Would we have Metal Gear Acid 4? Would we have all these spin-offs? And I'll leave it up to you to determine if you think that would have been a better future than the one we have now, but I do think it's an interesting thought. With all that out the way though, I've been Christian Cryers, and thanks for watching. So yeah, that's the video. This is the end of video discussion for everybody who made it to the end of the video. Yeah, this is probably my first big project. Like, The Last of Us thing, the Resident Evil 4 thing were literally all just ad-libs with some notes, but this is a properly scripted thing I did, and let me know how it turned out, because I think I was initially kind of apprehensive to the idea of doing a script, because I don't just want to be another like white dude in his 20s who has written scripts for video essays. Like, I don't want to be that guy, but I have to admit that I am that guy, so I've just got to embrace that. And I also wrote a really terrible video. I did a terrible video once when I was quite young on Scott Pilgrim, And I remember doing a script for that, and the script was just terrible, and my delivery was so bad, so I hope I've improved since then on that terrible Scott Pilgrim video, which will thankfully never be found by the internet. Unless, maybe one day, I won't rule it out, but anyway, yeah, let me know how this has gone. I think this is a super interesting topic, because everybody is talking about Metal Gear on the internet. It's a super passionate fan base, and I feel like this one doesn't really get talked about that much, so I thought this was an interesting thing to dive into. And yeah, let me know how this is. Subscribe. I've recently set up a Ko-fi, whatever the fuck, page. So if you've got like $5 on your card or whatever that you can spend, that you can share, go ahead and do it. Because I'm not going to set up a Patreon, because I just don't trust myself to deliver consistent content, and I don't want to be ripping people off for like 10 quid a month just for like a video of me saying, "Oh hi, I'm doing a shit right now," and that's content. No, I'm much more comfortable with people being able to just donate whatever they want, and that's just it. So yeah, thank you so much. Consider donating, consider subscribing, and hitting that bell icon. Maybe look back at some of the other catalogs, the Two People Talk About videos I'm super proud of. But yeah, thanks so much for even making it this far, and I really, really appreciate it. So thanks.